recording, okay?
Oh, you can start the recording if you want to.
Okay.
Okay.
Is this your office here? Is it just at the headquarters on Portland Place?
This is absolutely the one. Yeah, this is New Broadcasting House, and here we have, and the one screen shows the traffic. You know, how many people read, what they read, how they come to the site, to the BBC Russian.com site, and there you can see 4 screens showing the 2 Russian channels and just a host of other channels. And there's nobody here at the moment. Well, nobody. Some people are here. This is the skeletal group that is working from office. The rest of the people are working all from home. These are studios that we can see behind the glass walls. And at the moment, there are some of the programs coming out. And this is why, actually, the reason why I wanted to show you the office. This is called the atrium, and you can see the floors. So these are top floors, and we're on the 6th floors, and you can all the way go down and see people working. Some, you know, some half-empty offices mostly, and all the way down. And at the bottom, we can see the empty desks there. This is newsroom. There are also people working, but not in this part at the moment. And also you can see there elevators going up and down, and you only allowed 1 person per elevator. And on the stairs, it's only one way up. It's one way street. You only can go up or down. So they're allocated stairs for going up and allocated stairs for going down. So there's a bit more here you can see. Hold on. There you go. These are IT people, usually there, but at the moment they're not there, obviously. And little cabins here where you can have a little meeting if you want to.
That's nice.
So yeah, and I'm going to get into little cabin in here so that it's quiet enough and we don't bother anyone. And I'll close the door. And here we go. So,
Okay.
hello again. My name is Famil Ismailov, and I'm a news editor for the BBC Russian service. I've been working for the BBC for many years, since 1994, in many languages that I know and can use and speak, and different platforms. I've done TV, I've done radio, I've done writing, I've done online journalism, digital journalism, and I'm still fascinated by this profession. And I remember when we're at religious studies at school, and I remember the first line of Bible, which struck me as very, very inspiring, I would say, because it said, if you probably remember, that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Let's put aside the God bit, but in the beginning was the Word, and that's something, you know. And then I remember then at the uni, we've been told that the journalism is the 2nd oldest profession. Don't ask me which one is the first. Well, you'll find out soon enough. It's prostitution, basically. So that's considered the oldest profession ever, and journalism is the 2nd oldest. The way that I could see my profession developing since I've started when I was a 14-year-old kid, when I spoke to my dad and asked his permission to use his connections to go to the local newspaper and have a chat with the journalists. And that was when it started for me. And they said, okay, well, why don't you write a little piece for us, a little text, which I did. It was published, and it was the happiest day of my life. It was a very small city newspaper. And so it went on and on.
Where was it, Famil? Was it in Baku?
It was, well, it's a little town next to Baku called Sumgait. which is an industrial sort of satellite city, town of the capital of Azerbaijan, Baku. I was born and bred in Azerbaijan. At that time, it was part of the Soviet Union, and the whole thing was called Soviet Union. So I spoke Russian and Azerbaijani. When I was in my, that was when I went to the newspaper, I was 14 years old in my 8th grade. And when I was graduating, we had 10-year education, so 10th grade, the last grade. For 2 years, I had plans to go to study in Moscow. I wrote to the Moscow University, and they have this 2-year course which prepares you for the entrance exams. They sent me the books and the program of essays that I had to write. And that was the only time in my life I had planned everything very carefully and diligently. So I had the chapters of different textbooks allocated to different weeks, dates. So I had deadlines for each of the topic, each of the chapter, each of the essay, each of the submission date. So, and I followed those the deadlines really, really, committedly. There was nothing where I could throw everything away. No football, no games. We didn't have computer games at that time, but going out, having football, or having a swim in the sea, because Caspian Sea was basically next door. I would sit and just write them and read them and write again and try, and it gave result. I managed to get with the flying colors into the uni. And that's where it hit me that there's so many talented people, and I'm not talented at all. That's what I thought in myself. It's called, I think it's called first year or second year student, not depression, but sort of syndrome. When you get into uni, you think you are on the top of the world, and then you see so many talented people studying next to you, or you think they're talented. Maybe they think you're talented as well. They just don't tell you. What I did, it was again very sort of practical, pragmatic, and I just went to a central newspaper in Moscow. It was a big Soviet newspaper, Komsomolskaya Pravda. It was huge. It was very popular. And I said, well, give me anything. They said, what do you mean give me? I mean, I will take any task you want me to do. I will write it for you. I'll find out, what you need to find out, and I'll do it. They said, okay, well, here's 8, and I'll repeat again, 8 sacks of letters from readers. Find the letter, go to that place, write your story. Find your story in the 8 sacks of letters. So, I mean, each sack will be about that high, and it will be what, about 10 kilos. So 80 kilos of letters later, I found my story. I traveled there, and I came back. I published the story, and that was the start of a very good, because this was it's like you are a first year student and you come to work for Le Figaro, for example. That's that sort of level, yeah. And that was amazing, because I learned so much. And then I graduated, and because I wasn't Russian, I wasn't a member of the Communist Party, I didn't tick all the boxes of the Soviet time, so I wasn't allowed to stay in Moscow because you had to have a residence permit. And I went back to Baku. Again, life is hard when part of your dream to work for a big newspaper is taken away from you, but you continue working, And I happened to be writing in a newspaper in a really, really difficult times. There was the collapse of the Soviet Union, because I graduated in 1986, and in 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed. There was a war between Azerbaijan and Armenia over the Nagorno-Karabakh, continues until now. I traveled to Nagorno-Karabakh on duty trips, and I've been there, I've seen some stuff. Not as bad as many of my colleagues, some of whom actually had been ambushed with the military and were killed. It was a difficult time, but you go through. I mean, when I look at the lockdown of these sort of weeks, and we chat with my wife, and I tell her, "Come on, girl. I mean, we've been through such a difficult time. This is nothing compared to that." Mm. So back to my profession, it has changed a lot. When we used to have what the only thing you needed was basically a notebook and pen would be, as they say, stronger than Kalashnikov, because with pen you can hit further and you can change people's minds. And that's the amazing thing when you start getting letters from readers saying that I read your story, it's amazing, or I read a story, I understood so much more, or you've changed my views, or it was totally wrong, whatever. But the thing is that the basics of the profession stay, but technology has changed a lot. I remember when I was one of the biggest things that I had to learn as a student was the touch typing. Not many people could touch type because, well, at the moment you touch type on computer, it's basically the keyboard. But that you had to touch type on a mechanical, typing machine. Some people would use force with 2 fingers, but I learned it just because I was made to learn. But today you have to learn to touch type with your 2 thumbs. And I find it extremely difficult because I'm used to keep one and then you do this, but you have to do it like this. That's quite interesting. So the other thing is that the electronically you had to have, in TV you have to studios, in radio you have studios, you have big desks, yes, everything has to do lights, quality, all that stuff. But in the period, in this time of YouTube and TikTok and you name it, you do TV from your bedroom, okay, you can go onto Telegram and open a Telegram channel. I am subscribed to several important for me Telegram channels, and they are done now by a group of journalists. And they have almost 1 million subscribers, which is huge. Or a single person has 500,000 subscribers. Okay, what I'm talking about, Instagram. Kim Kardashian has, or whatever, or one of her girlfriends has 15 million, 20 million. There's this famous, he's not famous, he's very young man, Yuri Vduj, who does video films on YouTube. And his videos have been watched by 15, 7, 16 million people. It's bigger than the combined audience, is bigger than some TV channels. Today when we look at the traffic, how many people read our stories, we know exactly how many. So for example, I know that every month, about 10 million people read stories on our site, and that's only part of the audience, because what also happens, some of the videos are taken by our partners in Russia, and they rake up another 500,000 or million. But the thing is, exactly what's going on, how many people read your story, and it's amazing. So the technology has changed a lot. The social media has changed our job a lot, but the job stays the same. You say the word, you tell the story, and that's what's amazing thing about my profession. What I think is the main thing. You tell the story wherever you go. If it's a war, sort of war zone, or is it? I hope it doesn't hit there. If it's a war zone, or if it's I don't know, industrial collapse zone, or it's a hangar zone, or it's anywhere, all around the world, you just tell the story. And the story is people, how they live, what they do, what's their dreams, how they aspire. It's I had this conversation with a lady who's expert in ISIS, this Islamic State thing. And she just told me an amazing story when she spoke to some of the field commanders who told her that they had to join ISIS traveling from Turkey. And they asked, okay, what do you need, guys? What do you need? And the guy said, listen, he would expect that they will say, okay, bring, I don't know, ammunition, or I don't know, or plastic explosives, whatever. And they said, no, bring cookies. My mom's favorite cookies. Or she gave me, I found this recipe. Can you buy ingredients? We're going to make a big cake. Okay. So, it's part of life. And, you tell that story as well.
Yeah. So, Famil, could you explain the student the difference between your job, your work as news editor, and the job of a journalist, a regular one?
Okay. So journalist is a person who actually writes the story. Okay. So it's not a one person. So we have teams of journalists doing some writing the stories, some filming the stories, cameramen, producers, people who do editing, people who look after pictures. So my job as a news editor is to lead them, which means every morning we get together, we discuss what is the main issues and the main topics of today. Okay, so what people are looking for. So we'll look at the Google search, for example, and we see that in Google search, for example, people are looking for Mother's Day, or they're looking for how do I make a face mask for coronavirus. Okay, so we get together in the morning and say, okay, these are the things that people are looking for. Now, your reporters, tell us what is something that what are your story ideas, and we start exchanging stories. So we put together our own ideas and what the day's agenda is, because they're big subjects that it's important that we cover as well. For example, the Afghanistan. People don't talk about Afghanistan so a lot because people are used to having explosions, people killed, attacks day in, day out, day in, day out. So what we do in the morning, we discuss, okay, there's been another attack in Afghanistan. If we just report it as is, like, okay, suicide bombing in Kabul, so that many killed, that many injured, it's the 2nd or 3rd or 15th since the beginning of the month, blah, blah, blah. People won't read it because they're so used to it. Unfortunately, that's the nature of human. And so let's start looking at it in a different way. Where was the explosion? It was, the attack was on a hospital. So what happened there? The attack was on a maternity unit. So they were shooting indiscriminately at the mothers-to-be, the new mothers and babies. And one of the babies survived. Here's the story.
Yeah, I saw that story yesterday.
Yeah.
So it's something that's new, and then you report on that because it's a different angle, or
yeah, you find the angle. Or, for example, if we find this new thing, for example, the Moscow authorities decided to provide masks for for Moscowites. So Moscow has a new rule: anybody who travels on tube or public transport has to wear masks and gloves. But what they didn't say, they didn't say that 2 weeks before that they bought a plant, a factory, basically a mask making line in a different part of Russia, and they brought it to Moscow, reinstalled it in Moscow. They took the ownership of it, and now they're making money on that.
Oh.
Okay, that's a very interesting story. So we'll go for it. So the two teams, one in London for us, for the Russian service, one in Moscow. So the Moscow is led by other editors. Here, it's me, it's a planning editor, and there's video editor, and groups of journalists who do different things. And sorry, somebody's trying to call me. There you go. And we talk to each other as well, because there's time difference between us and Moscow, 3 hours. So we talk to each other and say, okay, Moscow does this, okay, good. We do this, okay, good. So what are deadlines? Which stories we're going to come out today? Which stories need 2-3 days of writing? So, okay, what's the video team doing? Video team is doing this. Okay, good. Will that be added to the text story, or can we do it separately? Okay, and that's how we coordinate things. So my job is to inspire, to coordinate, and to make sure that people have all the necessary things. For example, because we work remotely from home, some of the people say, I don't have connection, something doesn't work. Guess what? Before they go to IT, I try to sort it out myself. Okay, so, sometimes I'd make a joke and say that, well, I can send you some coffee, you know, as well, or I can serve you some coffee. If, you know, it's just a joke, of course. But what happens that you take care of people, and people will take care of your of the site. At the same time, I consider myself hands-on editor because when new technologies come in and things are happening, I try it first myself and make sure that I know how it works. And if needed, I can explain it to other people. I can remedy if there are any problems. I can look after people and also look after what are they doing, and so that I understand what could be the problem.
Mm-hmm. So if the students have questions to ask you, I sent you the list the question that we created.
Yeah.
And so if you have one of the questions that you would like to ask to Famil, please do, because I have a lot of questions, but I'm not the one. Alice, okay.
Hi, my question is, what sort of barriers or problems do you face during your job?
Okay, there are several barriers. There are psychological barriers. One of them is people like things that they know very well, and traditional sort of look at the journalism. For example, there's this belief that if somebody has reported, let's say, we have competitors. Okay, so if our competitors reported something, there's no point of us reporting it because somebody is already there. And what I say to this is that, okay, that's fine, they reported it, but if we can see a better angle, why don't we do it? Okay, they reported that Putin said something. Okay, we can fact check what Putin said and find out if it's based on the wrong information. The second thing is, for example, that people say it's date stamp. And my belief is that date stamp has been exaggerated. Thing can be 2-3 days old, but people still will read it. So you don't have to have only today's stories on the site. Some of the stories, especially near news, as I call them, stories, they can be from yesterday, from the day before. They haven't heard of them. And especially if it's our own angle, if it's something that we added to it that others don't have, that's more important that people see it on our site. There's also sort of lapse between how the technology. Okay, so the social media is full of information. It's like noise. To get through it is quite difficult. So you have to think about it. Lots of people take the information from social media, but it's not always the right information. Sometimes it's a wrong information. It's an open lie sometimes. And here I come to the third and big obstacle, which is political. People who govern countries, political leaders, have always been trying to make sure that they control or manipulate journalists since the ancient times. Okay, and today, if they cannot buy you, they try to push you, or they create their own institutions or use the other tools. Like, for example, some countries, some governments have a particular media that serves their interest, and they call it that. This is like Russia Today, for example, or RT, channel RT, which is not directly paid for by the government, but I don't remember they ever criticized Mr. Putin at all. Never. Because what they think is that he's son of a bitch, but he's our son of a bitch. So he looks after our interests. So we must look after his interests, which means that we look after Russia's interests, which is a totally wrong submission altogether. It's just not an argument at all. Also, the social media is being used very widely by governments. They create special groups of people, structures that throw in bots, hackers, misinformation. There's so much misinformation, but that BBC has a group of people who are looking after that misinformation, trying to find out what's going on, link them up. You know, we've done numerous investigations ourselves, and we found this office in St. Petersburg from where Russian misinformation was thrown into, especially in 2016 during the US elections and before the Brexit referendum. They're trying to create bubbles of opinions, because what happens on social media, people tend to get to the groups that express the values and views that are close to them. Okay, let's say if I love sci-fi, I'll become a member of sci-fi group. Okay, if I am homophobic, I will try to get to the group that is homophobic. If you know, and so forth. Okay, so what they do, they try to create these little bubbles and create as much politicized views as possible, as they try to create utterly different, very sort of at the ends of political spectrum, and put those ends of political spectrum into fight with each other. I remember when we used to have comments page open for each story, and every discussion of every story would either end up with Palestinian-Israeli conflict or Armenian-Azerbaijani conflict. Okay, and it would end up with the same people from 9 to 5 appearing on the comments page and making disparaging comments about everyone. So the more, you know, war of words, brawl and fight is there, the better for them. So that's what they do. So there are lots, as you can see, there are lots and lots of things happening. And the last also half political, but part technical, is the control of the internet. The flow of information always has been the foundation of success of every country. All the big positive things that we've seen in the world since globalization was due to the free flow of information. But some people don't like it. Some people think that capitalism or the West uses this information technique to manipulate the public opinions against their leaders. So that's how they see it, because authoritarian leaders always think that somebody's out there to get them. So what they do, they now create censorship. Where they cannot create censorship, they try to create what they call sovereign internet, so national internet. Like it's basically an intranet, which is like the one that you have, for example, in North Korea, which doesn't go out, or the Great Chinese Internet Wall that basically has a filter, and even companies like Google had to, you know, kowtow to them and make sure that some of the search terms are not being able to be searched in China. So there are lots of things happening in that way, trying to hinder our work. But I mean, we're still there. We're still working. Yeah, go on.
Yes, and so, Famil, have you ever felt threatened in any way when you were working in Moscow or even here in the UK? Because you said that you started at the BBC in 1994, I think. And so, how did you end up here in the UK? Yeah. And have you ever felt threatened working on this, on such touchy subject?
Okay. In 1994, I just signed a contract. They've been looking for people. They recruited me in Baku. I came to the job interview. I mean, I made an application, came to a job interview, and answered questions. And then they called me back and said, "Okay, well, we want to offer you a job." When working, I worked in Azerbaijan for a while, not in Azerbaijan, but in BBC Azerbaijani service before moving to Russian service. And pressure, maybe it was kind of very subtle. It was probably nudge rather than pressure. What happens today in Russia and in Azerbaijan, it all has become less subtle, more pressure in terms of they see BBC as, and they think that BBC is the tool of British government and the voice of British government that should be kept at distance. We know that the telephone conversations in Moscow office most probably have been eavesdropped or recorded or listened to. We found it out how we found out because one of the conversations was leaked to the Russian tabloid newspapers. And we know that they listen. But we take it now straight because that's what happens. Once I was in Azerbaijan and had a chat with an old friend who unfortunately happens to be a security officer and security director of security services since Donkey's time. But we used to study in Moscow together. He used to study history and I was studying journalism. And I asked him, just tell me honestly, how big is my case, my folder with all information about me? And he openly said, "No, it's all right. It's big enough, but nothing for us to worry about." I said, "Okay, well." I openly do my job. I don't, I don't do, deals on the side. We're not there. We're not, we are journalists. We find the story. We try to find the story at least, and we tell the story. We're not there to, we're definitely not there to lie. It's, you can get sacked if you lie. Secondly, we don't do untruths. We don't hide bits of truth or make an incomplete picture. We try to be honest. We try to be balanced. Okay, so the part of the system are professionals who, even as politicians, understand that journalists should be friends, not foes. You have to be friends with journalists. You shouldn't be shouting at them from the at the press conferences like some of the presidents do. But at the same time, the professionals in the security services, they understand that journalists mostly do their job. Of course, there are some journalists who are probably working for someone. And I remember in Soviet times, journalism was the best cover for intelligence work abroad. So the Soviet journalists would be journalists, but at the same time, they would do intelligence work.
Yes.
And that's horrible because you either do this or that. You cannot do both. It's not that kind of you cannot sit on two chairs at the same time.
So that was one of the questions. Will, could you please turn on your camera because I think it was one of your questions. Do you remember in class? Yes. So yes. It was exactly that this question. So could you just ask your question because it's completely linked.
Okay, you have to be completely honest with me here.
I will. I promise.
Are you a spy?
That's what some of my British friends say. No, I'm not. But I'll be brutally honest with you. When I was in Azerbaijan and I was working for a newspaper, every newspaper had its curator, as they called them. So from the KGB, and this KGB guy came, and I wasn't a bad journalist, and he came to see me and said, "Listen, my boss wants to talk to you." I said, "Okay, well, let's do it." And we went there. His boss was also open. It was the department was called the Defense of Constitution Department. I don't know what that means, but I can sort of guess. And he said, "Listen, we are opening this. We want to open archives. We need journalists who look into archives, write stories, and we want to invite you to, as a member of staff, come and work with us." I said, "You know what? I quite enjoy my job, because at that time we just opened the first independent newspaper in Azerbaijan, completely independent. We owned it. It wasn't a party newspaper as all of them used to be." And he said, "Well, I understand you enjoy it, but we can probably give you more money. How much do you earn?" And that was the one time I lied. I told the sum, which was probably 2 or 3 times more than I actually was earning. I said, "No, we cannot pay you that much. But we've got lots of other things like sort of special provisions in terms of food, you know, that sort of thing. I said, you know what, no, I mean, you know, let me think. So I went to talk to my very old friend, with whom we used to study. He's 5 or 10 years bigger than me. And he said a wonderful thing. He said, Famil, of course you can go and work for the KGB, but the problem is, and they might maybe even, you know, pay you more. And my father, remember, he was very angry with me not wanting to go there. He said, listen, newspapers come and go, KGB stays, it's always there. And he was right, but, you know, up to a point. And but my friend said me a very, very wise thing. He said, you know, you might go there and probably even be successful, but your reputation will be in ruins. Absolutely in ruins. And I thought about it for about probably half an hour, and I said, you're so right. You're so right. I mean, that was one single thing that helps you to make decision. My dad was very angry, and we didn't speak for about a month. He was very angry. I mean, because you basically look, I mean, working for KGB in Soviet times was, you know, you should be proud. Okay, and that was it. So I could have been a spy.
Another question. Someone. You have a long list, though. Just otherwise, Mr. McDonald had a question as well. I think you raised your hand.
I did. I'm just wondering if you have an example that where you had to make a difficult choice, and where your work in Russia or through Moscow was on a fine line between keeping access and or losing access. I don't know much about it, but I know that for the Canadians in the room, we have a deputy prime minister who used to work for the Financial Times in the Moscow bureau, and now Chrystia Freeland. I think she's still banned. She's still banned from Russia. So it's an interesting career where she's gone from being a journalist herself to a politician. But I'm not sure if you have any other light to shed on that story, if you can, or any similar.
Yeah, I can't, but I mean, I know her, but not personally. So I've caught up with her in Moscow at some point, but you know, I'm not privy. I don't know how she went from one to another. Some people do. Some people do.
Mm-hmm. So I have a question.
Hold on, let me just answer the when you make decisions. Sometimes we have to make very difficult decisions, specifically on when the lives of our contributors could be in danger. So you have duty of care to people that you talk to, people that you use for your story, or whose story you tell. And what happens sometimes when you understand that if you write the story, publish the story, the people will be in trouble, or could be a danger. So you have to find ways, tell the story and avoid the danger for your contributors. So what you do, you might, you know, change the names, and you honestly say that we changed names or change the voices by actor because of the danger to the life of these people. Pictures, you blur the faces. You know, you do all this stuff on purpose because you have duty of care. But we have absolutely amazing journalists who are very brave. And if you remember, you don't know, but Mr. Putin does every year this big 4-hour, 5-hour conversation with journalists. What they also do, they invite together with journalists from all over the place or all over Russia, also strange people who stand up and take about 15 minutes to pronounce their love for Mr. Putin personally and everything that he does. And they prefer to be journalists. So one of our reporters was sitting there, and she had a little placard saying family. And I think Mr. Putin thought that she's going to ask about, she's probably from magazine about family and ask about family issues. And he said, "Wait, that girl with the family placard." And she stood up, absolutely amazing, without even changing her face, and said, "Mr. Putin, why don't you all ever talk about your daughters and your family? One of your older daughter does this and that and that. Your other daughter does that and that and that. but what do you think, when you're going to bring them to the public? And he was absolutely, you know, delirious. He was just, his face was like, I'm gonna kill you. But I mean, she asked this question, and you have to be really brave, because it's really, really hard. And she did, and I admire her for that.
Mm-hmm. Well, so Saron, would you have a question? Oh, she disappeared. Karine or Kara or Emma, because I know that you wrote lots of questions. Emma.
So what inspired you to choose this career in particular?
Well, as I said, I was always from childhood was fascinated with words, how they play with each other, how they come to become sentences. And then I was, when I was a small kid, I would write little poems, and I would be arrogant enough to read them out to our family's guests and get laughed at, because obviously, you know, a 4-year-old boy, you know, cannot write serious poem. At some point, obviously, I stopped by doing that, because I'm no poet at all. But I started, and you know, it continued from there. So I was writing essays at work. I was writing for a newspaper, and it just went on and on and on. But I mean, the fascination started from very childhood. I mean, sometimes it goes with you. You don't even realize it. It's just somewhere in your brain, and you think, I like doing this all the time. I mean, I always loved, and some people, for example, I've heard that Dyson, the guy who invented this wonderful bagless vacuum cleaner, actually, when he was a kid, he was doing all those little design engineering stuff, you know, when it just happens. And at the end of the day, the thing is, it's, you know, you try different ways, because not many people who graduated with me stayed as journalists. Okay, some of them went to work for publishing, some to PR. A guy who graduated with me is now Putin's deputy, for example. Okay, so he's a politician. He's the first deputy of he's Dmitry Rogozin, in charge of Russian space program, and he's first deputy prime minister. So, and he's very close to Mr. Putin. And you know, so people do different things. But at the end of the day, the main thing is, you know, there's one thing that you want to do, and try your best to learn how to do the best of it, and just go and do it. I can tell you that there's no money in journalism. I don't know a journalist who has become a very rich person unless he became a publisher and, you know, published newspapers and just, you know, wrote books and became a writer, and successful writer, because not many, you know, there's so many writers and not many of them are successful at all. But the main thing is that, you know, enjoyment, and as long as I enjoy it, I'll be doing it. If I stop enjoying it, I'll just do something else.
Saron, est-ce que tu as une question? Will you have a question, Saron, for Famil? Would you have a question?
My question would be, well, when
closer, a bit closer.
Well, we're IGCSE history students, and each source we look at, we try to look at the different sides. Yeah. So what would be your approach to bias, and is there a golden rule in journalism to a story and its different sides?
Mm-hmm. Okay. First, about bias. You have to be honest and as much unbiased as possible. Sometimes no, but it's never a rule of 50-50, you know, exactly 50% about, you know, black, and exactly 50% about white. There's something we call balance over time, because there are some topics that are very complex, and you cannot explain them in a 3-minute report, 5-minute report, or even half an hour report. So you try to explore them over time, but you have to make sure that if you've spoken to you know, let's say Labour, you should talk to the Tories. But what I would also say, you should also speak to Liberal Democrats, maybe. Okay, so there is this fascination with sort of expression of non-biased approach. At the end, I think the main thing is that you actually be reasonable and have common sense about it. Lying is not common sense. It always comes back biting you. So have common sense. But that's why you have to be as balanced as possible. Sometimes you don't have enough information. You have to be honest about it. For example, or there's always this thing called a right of reply. If you criticize someone, whoever it is, even Mr. President, okay, well, you send a letter to the presidential administration saying, listen, here are the questions. Can you answer those questions? At least you give them chance to answer for themselves. And if they, refuse, sometimes they keep silent, they just don't say anything. You can write that, okay, we asked the presidential administration, why blah, 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 and they haven't replied, or we expect them to reply. That's it. Now, the other question about the, what was it? Said main, could you repeat the second part?
Perspective, the perspectives.
Yes. The technology changes a lot. So, Catherine, I just want to make sure that I'm answering the right question. What was the second part again?
So the second part was about bias, but the first part was about the perspectives.
Yeah, the different sides of one story.
All right, gotcha. All right, so there are different genres. The interview. If you have a story, it could be anything. It could be an interview. It could be a short news story. It could be a long essay. It could be a documentary. It could be a digital video. It could be what we call opinion column. It could be vox pops. It could be anything. I mean, there's so many platforms. Sometimes what I call this thing called the news in one picture. There's one picture which is better than anything. And instead of writing 1,000 words, you just sort of, you publish the picture with a couple of paragraphs. So when it comes to the length, what we usually have is the news stories about something about up to 400, maybe 500 words long. Anything more than that is not news story. But the formats are all very different. The format called, for example, an explainer. So where you explain things. There's a format called Q&A, question and answer. So we still write your story, but we're, stating a question, trying to reply. There's a picture gallery, for example. It's also very good. So you tell the story in pictures. There's a what we call self-authored piece, where, for example, you take your iPhone and you just go around and you show and tell, and that's another one. So there's so many ways, and I think in the future, the stories on different sites will have will look like a hybrid in between text, pictures, videos, social media embeds, because you can embed Twitter, someone's tweet, you can embed Instagram, you can do all sorts of things. So the technology makes it even richer for you. It gives you much more tools to tell the story. But the thing is, whatever you do, the essence stays the same. You tell the story.
So we are almost at the end of the chat. Mrs. Zobak, do you have a question? Do you have a question? Because otherwise I have one.
Yeah, ask yours. I'll come back with mine after then. Go get
Okay. So my question, Famil, would be, do you have one of the subject, the paper that you have written or that you are very proud of? And it can be, I think it can be difficult because you have been a journalist for so many years, so maybe there is not only one, but in case, do you have one that you are particularly proud of? And explain me why.
I've done this interview with, I just from top of my head, I did this interview with Andron Konchalovsky, who's a famous Russian film director, and Hollywood as well. He's been nominated for Oscar. And I asked him about his views on the way the Russian sort of national character. And it's so interesting that he made no difference between so-called national character. He said it's not about national character per se, because if you start comparing Italians, French, Russians, I don't know, Chinese, you will probably see some local differences, or differences which are dictated by the local conditions of life. For example, some people, I know Japanese don't shake hands, for example. Well, that's different. But the Italians, I mean, they not just shake hands, they still kiss each other on the cheek, even at the coronavirus time, you know. It's the humanity that has its overarching purpose of you know, being happy and you know, bringing up children and leaving something after you, and some legacy. And at the end of the day, it said everyone wants just normal life, you know, and that's the purpose. And you know, the problem with in Russia was this totally different, nothing to do with Russian national character, but to do with the governance, with the people who are in power, who are in charge. And he was very open about it. We spoke for about half an hour, and the interview was about 5,000 words, but it was massively popular. I didn't realize that. You know, he was talking about in a really sort of complicated language as well. But it was quite interesting. So it was something I was very proud of. I was also proud of one of the first interviews of Azerbaijani President, late Heydar Aliyev, when the first thing I said, it was quite challenging, and I was just sitting there with the headphone and say, well, Mr. President, you said that Azerbaijani people will be happy. What is happy? When? He said, they will be. When? They will be. They were 3 years, 5 years, I don't know. And it was just went on, and he was opening up so quickly, you know, because it was such a personal question, you know. Yeah. So
Yeah.
we get excited sometimes, quite.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. So hi. First of all, thank you for coming to speak with our students in IFA. That's very nice of you, you know, to devote some of your time for them.
Pleasure.
My question is, do you always feel comfortable about writing, you know, as a journalist who reports for, you know, the BBC on the Russian? Do you feel more comfortable if you're doing this here in London, or would it be more difficult if you were living in Russia, for example?
That's a very good question.
Do you think that for you, you know, as a journalist, it's you feel more freedom, or, you know, to be able to express yourself that if you were in Moscow, for example?
Yeah, that's a very good question. It depends who you work for. When you work for the BBC, you are being supported by a huge, amazing brand, you know, news brand, which is known all over the world. Okay, and you also are supported by the British government, because this is British Broadcasting Corporation. Okay, if someone in Moscow, let's say, arrests a BBC journalist, you know, there could be consequences. There will be consequences on political level, and they know that. At the same time, what they try to do, they try to use it to their own advantage and make sure that the Russian propaganda networks like Russia Today or Sputnik are not touched in Britain. And the Ofcom, which is a regulator for the media, has tried to find or put fine on RT for biased coverage of, I don't remember what it was, elections, something. And the Russian government came out and said, if something happens to the RT, expect something to happen to the BBC. They were quite open, BBC in Moscow. So now there's a difference. If I was working in Azerbaijan, I always tell myself that I would be in a real difficulty, and also very restricted, because You either have to work for the government or you are being marginalized or put out of work. And I've seen people killed who were sort of outspoken and wouldn't stop. Okay, but I mean, they're also, I mean, it's not like you just, I don't like him, somebody goes and kills him. No, it comes to the point when your life is in danger. The same happened quite a few times in Russia as well. People were poisoned. Okay, but at the end of the day, I think working for the BBC is a blessing because you are part of something big. You have a feeling of belonging. And also it's a good schooling because we don't publish things just to make people annoyed or Putin annoyed. We tell the story. We make sure that we don't endanger our contributors, or actually we follow the law. So nobody can come and tell us, you violated Russian law. We have lawyers in Moscow and lawyers in Britain, where, we make sure that if there's according to Russian law, if you have someone, picture of two men holding hands on the street, it's a propaganda of some homosexuality, for example. So, okay, so if you have a story about anything to do with homosexuality at all, it's risk. So you have to go through law and say, okay, well, this is the story, this is the text, tell us what kind of risk we have there, and then we decide, do we change things, don't we change things? It's quite important that we have that. And also, especially if it's people, homosexuals in Russia, if we expose them, they will be in real danger from patriots, and people like nationalists and thugs and so forth. So yes, there is pressure. We know that they're looking, they're always lurking behind and just, making sure that they're under control. I understand that because they think that the British government is out there to get them. I understand that they don't want us to uncover things that they don't want others to find out and to know. But that's our job. And we send people to Donetsk, the east of Ukraine, where they reported from there. They had been in danger. Some of them had been very close to be shot at, very close. They've been lined up. The cameraman, producer, journalist lined up at the wall, and the local checkpoint. And if it wasn't to the officer who came out of this bunker and said, what is this? Who are these people? These are spies, British spies. He said, what are you talking about? Who are you? We are journalists, blah, 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 documents. Are you crazy? You want to shoot them? And they let them go, but they were very close to be shot at. So it's dangerous sometimes. It's really, really dangerous. But again, it's our job, and we make everything possible that we safely go, write the story, and safely bring it back and publish it. And and if there's a consequence that we have to stand up to the authorities, we will stand up to the authorities. But we have to make sure that we follow all the rules, and nobody can tell us that we don't follow the rules.
Okay. So thank you very much, Famil, once again.